Okay. What's up, everybody? Tune in to our very first podcast here with Lynn. Sorry, and if I get your name wrong, Liz, I apologize. This is my very
Okay.
first.
It's my last name is pronounced Dozier.
Dozier.
Yeah, like dough and then jur. Because dough
Gotcha.
you can need bread, like bread dough. So Dozier, and then my first name is Liz.
Gotcha. What's going on, everybody? Antwan from Showtime for here. Hey, guys, we have a very special guest in the house with us today. For this interview, feel free to tune into our social media page, Chicago 4, Brian Brady, Antwan Ward, Liz Dozier for our very first interview. Tune in, guys. You will not regret it. Go. All right. Are we ready to get this train on the road?
Let's get the train on the road.
All right.
Let's get it on the tracks. Maybe not the road, but we'll get on the tracks.
hey, Liz, as long as we moving, I'm okay with it. I guarantee
Yeah, you know it is what it is.
There you go. All right. Brian, whenever you're ready.
All right. Ready.
All right. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to our very first episode podcast of Chicago 4, shining a spotlight on Chicago leaders and innovators here in the city of Chicago. And we have a very special guest in the house with us today. She is the CEO and founder of Chicago Beyond, Mrs. Liz Dozier. Mrs. Liz, how are you doing? I know you said call you Liz, but I'm so used to putting Mrs., Miss, Mr., and Mrs. behind it in front of it. So bear with me with that.
All good. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited I get to be the first. You know what I mean? This is like, I feel like I'm breaking new ground and territory here. This is amazing. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then alongside to your left, we got the executive producer, great friend of mine, Brian. Brian, how's it going?
Going great. It's exciting to have our first show together, Antwan. Hopefully many more to come.
Yes, hopefully so, man. Let's make sure we do this right and have some fun and inform the people about some wonderful things that are going on here in the city of Chicago and the people that are doing the things that make the city what it is. So very first question, Liz, I got a chance to read up on you. You have had a very amazing journey, not only in your life, but just working with the city of Chicago. I was a student at High School back during your time when you were working at Fenger High School.
Yeah.
And so I know your story. It was nationwide. It was something that was very big here in the city. I want to know, starting off, your transition from educator to activist. How did that transition come along, and what was the motivation behind it?
Yeah, I don't know if there was ever like a specific point, if you will, from like educator to activist. Like I think that, the way I grew up, my mom, and this, story is public. I've talked about it before, but my dad, my mom met under very interesting circumstances. My dad was actually being held at Cook County Jail. He was awaiting a trial. My mom was actually a nun who was essentially ministering to folks in prison. She was also teaching folks how to read. And so that's how my parents met. Long story short, 10 years later, my mom left the convent. She had me. And so like this idea of being really aware of what's happening in the world and what's happening around me, and realizing that there are a lot of injustices that are happening in the world. I learned that from like a very, very early age. It was just part of like conversation in my household growing up. And so, my mom also was a teacher. And so education was a big thing in our house as well. We didn't grow up with a lot, if you will, but education was always like prioritized in our home. And so I think that the combination of just like understanding some of the social realities, but also understanding the importance of education made for the backdrop of what my life and career has really been dedicated to. I saw, firsthand with my dad. My dad's an incredibly, if you met him, like he's just brilliant. He's one of the kindest, smartest people that you'd ever want to meet. Yet, he is not a functional reader. My dad's 70 something years old now, but cannot read. And I just saw, again, up front and center, the injustices of the system. And so always, from really early age, wanted to do something about it. And so, hence, like, here we are.
I met you, Liz, when you were you'd taken over and the turnaround process was going, right? And you took over Fenger High School at a challenging time when I think 19% 19%. The statistics, you moved the statistics greatly. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that period of your life. And obviously you became somewhat of a celebrity because of the Chicagoland series, but really delving into that turnaround process, because it was quite controversial at the time, but it seemed to work for Fenger. So I'd love to have your thoughts on that period of your life.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I just want to say, just on a personal note, thank you for being so supportive during that time, Brian. Like, I will never forget like how kind you were during that time and how supportive you were to us and to the kids, whether it was, connecting us with particular reporters to get our story out, or just showing up and being really present. And, anyone who's been through, a traumatic situation, which at times, because of what we were facing at Fenger, it was really traumatic. It's good just to have support. And so just thank you again for all that you did during that time.
My heart broke for you in that, as you know, with Darian Albert's tragic death. And then the media was its worst self at that time.
It was
both the best and the worst of the media though, right?
Yeah. No, it was a wild time. The turnaround process itself is interesting, like looking back on it now. This Fenger High School, just for context for the audience, went through the turnaround process, I'll put that in air quotes, in 2009. And so this is, we're now talking about over a decade ago. And so as I look back on it, there's some incredible things about, that happened specifically with, Fenger High School and with its turnaround, whether it's, doubling our state graduation rate from 40% to over 80%, or the dropout rate going down from 20% to down below 2%. There were the great things that were happening at the school, but yet it's a really challenging process, and one that, as I reflect back on it, is it's just, I think what the right words are here. It is traumatic, and it is, I think, sometimes even somewhat unnecessary in the way that it was executed. So just for context for the audience, the turnaround process essentially takes, all the adults who are within the school building, essentially lets all of those people go and brings in entirely new staff. And some of those, a few of those team members are still retained, but we're talking about, usually like less than 5%. And it just really rips apart community, and it rips apart some of the fabric that in relationships that hold a school together, that make a school, that make it a safe place for kids. And so, there are definitely, I think, good aspects and good intentions behind turnaround, but often I think it can be really, really challenging. So Chicago was, big in the turnaround movement, about a decade or so ago, but has since transitioned from that. And I can see both the pros and the cons to why that was done. Our turnaround process was interesting in that, that very same sort of starting point was what happened at Fenger, right? Everyone was let go, and new staff was brought in. But what I quickly learned as the principal was that, there was a lot of institutional knowledge, a lot of relationships that were shattered because of that. And so really the bulk of that first couple of years of my time at Fenger and my team's time at Fenger was just reestablishing that really important fabric of relationships, and knowing families, and knowing community, and knowing what kids were up against, and really meeting their needs. Wherever that would be, whether that was for, social emotional supports, trauma counseling, making sure that we had, the sports and activities that, adults understood, like cultural competency and context and all those things. We spent a lot of time just rebuilding essentially what the turnaround, tore apart. And once we did that, then we were able to get into some of the, the nuances of education and, test scores and all those types of things. But it definitely, that process was, if nothing else, it was challenging.
I can definitely speak from the perspective of a student who has been involved and witnessed turnarounds. Like I said, I went to Orr High School during a time where Orr wasn't the best as well. And Orr, during my time there, during my 4.5 years, 4.5 because I did summer school, long story, don't want to talk about it. But I witnessed Orr being turned around twice. And as you talked about, one of the things that was for me as a student back then was being heartbroken by the fact that some of the teachers that we felt gave us, who I felt gave us nutritional value when it came to not only learning the curriculum, but also just caring about us as people, that was ripped apart. It was just, as a student, you kind of feel like, okay, really is out for us as students. So for me to hear your story, to hear from a perspective of an educator, in terms of some of the work that you did, and also the steps it took to be able to get back into the graces of the students, because at the end of the day, the students are what matters. So kudos to you for all the work that you've done with Fenger and just hearing about that process. My question for you with that would be, what was the most rewarding aspect of, obviously you dealt with a lot of hardship, being able to just like deal with not only the media that came with everything, with the turnaround, the students, the parents, the community. What was the shining light for you through all of the chaos that came with everything, in terms of the media and parenting? Basically, what was just like the highlight for you?
Yeah, my favorite part of all of that was my kids, my students. I really enjoyed my relationships with my students. Like it's such a privilege and an honor to be a principal, to be charged with essentially stewarding young people at a very critical point of their life. Like I always think of, high school as this time of just setting the stage for a young person's life. There are going to be some really critical decisions that young people are making during that time period that are going to essentially impact the rest of their life in some form or fashion. And so it's such an honor and a privilege to be a part of that. And it's just such an honor and a privilege to actually watch students grow. Like, I mean, all of us have been through high school. We work with high school students. Like, you see a student come in ninth grade and everyone's sort of like awkward and trying to get themselves together. And you got someone who's like 4 feet tall and someone who's like 6 feet tall, and they're all in ninth grade. It's like this thing, and they're trying to figure themselves out. And then to be able to watch that transition, and have a relationship with a child like through 9th through 12th grade and beyond, and see them grow is just, I don't know what else to say other than it's a privilege and an honor. And it was, really for me, it was the best part of being a principal, of like walking through the hallways and knowing students' stories and knowing their families. It was the relational piece that was always the highlight and the best part of it for me. And it's honestly what kept me in it for as long as I stayed. I was at Fenger for 6 years. I was never a fan of the politics. I was never a fan of a lot of the red tape and minutia and all those things. But, it truly was the young people that just literally lit me up in so many ways. And in a lot of ways became like a family for me. My family's, my situation growing up was, there's a lot of not so great things that happened growing up and in my home. And in a lot of ways, being a part of Fenger felt like the family that I had always wanted. It just was. I don't know how else to describe it, but it just was. And so it was a privilege and honor to lead the school for as long as I did.
I just walking those halls and seeing, and then seeing our friend AJ do work with you, AJ Johnson, who ran your peace council, and there was a sense of family on your staff that was really, that the students picked up on, and just a sense of caring that when you walked into the doors. I used to say
it wasn't perfect, like I always say, like nothing's perfect, so we definitely had our challenges and all the things, but at the end of the day, there were a lot of people at Fenger, parents, students, teacher, all of us that like really cared a lot about one another, and cared a lot about, making our school community bright and making it beautiful and making it a safe place to be. And I think that's the story that doesn't get told oftentimes when people cast a certain narrative out in the world about our schools, particularly when it comes to Black and brown schools, particularly when it comes to Black and brown schools in urban areas. There's this narrative cast, like, the parents don't care and the kids don't care and the teachers don't care and all this, and it's really not true. And that narrative propagates, I believe the undertone of it is oftentimes racism, but it propagates a lot of things out in the world that are false. So.
Yeah. It's kind of fascinating how you can walk into a school and in the first 5 minutes, your interactions with the administrative staff, with the security staff, tell you so much about the school.
Mm-hmm.
You almost don't even have to go in a classroom to know if how the school is doing.
Yeah, very true.
Let's switch a little bit to your current work now, because I think you are a revolutionary educator, but now I think you're a revolutionary philanthropist. And I love some of the things you put out. Why am I always being researched? That document about Black and brown folks getting perpetually researched, and the research industrial complex extracting money and studying people and solving other people's problems sometimes, right? So I thought that was brilliant, but I wanted to drill down. I think your main platform now is Whole Philanthropy, and I love how you put it together, and I also kind of enjoy the critique under the surface of current philanthropy.
Yeah.
So I was hoping to I went to the details on page 16 to 20 of your report, and there were 6 items that you talk about the details behind impact philosophy, and I'll read a couple, and then just love for you to kind of delve a little deeper into it, and then so maybe we'll take the first 3 here, and then the last 3 have to deal with measurement. But your first one is prioritize what's important instead of searching for the perfect answer, and I circled the word perfect on there because I thought that was a critique of as well. Focus on key questions over easy metrics, and I circled easy metrics there because I think so much of what we fail to do is because of those trying to find easy metrics. And then center voices closest to the work. Could you delve into those 3 philosophies? And I'm in love with them, so I'm already persuaded, but I just want to hear how that's working out for you. And how has the philanthropy community taken this not so subtle critique?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. So I'll back up to why am I always being researched? I think it's a really important point that it's just now, because of the last 2 years and what's happened in the last 2 years in the world, beginning to actually get some light shine on it. But it's this idea of, particularly with research, and you see this a lot of times, I think, out of the University of Chicago urban labs, particularly the crime education lab. It's this premise of an idea that, Black people need to be somehow solved, or that poor people need to be solved, or that community needs to be solved. And it doesn't really account for what are the underlying drivers of why communities are in the particular situation that they're in. Why does violence in communities, why does it exist the way it does? And it pits really, particularly Black people and brown people, as like problematic, and which is for all the reasons we know is not right. And so it was really important. We see research usually as like a driver under that philosophy, whether it's direct or indirect, and some of the tone. And so it was important for us to publish Why Am I Always Being Researched, because we saw that same thing popping up in philanthropy, where there was, I'll actually tell you a story of how we came up with the name. There was a young man who was in Lawndale, and there was a study being conducted by the University of Chicago. Actually, Chicago Beyond at the time was funding. And the young man who's actually on the cover of Why Am I Always Being Researched, he said to the researcher, as like an assistant researcher person, it was the most genuine question ever. He had to sign off on a form to participate in the research study for the program that he was in. And he was, I think, at the time, 19, 20 years old. And he asked the most genuine question. He said to the research assistant, he was like, he's like, I just don't understand. He's like, can you help me understand this? He's like, I've signed off on a couple of these forms over the last couple of years to consent to be a part of a research study. And he was like, I sign off on these things and I don't understand what happens. Like why am I always being researched? Why is my community always being researched, and what really comes of it? So we had, really taken that question to heart of like, what actually does need to be researched, and why? And why are we positioning our communities, and particularly Black people, as like problems that need to be solved? And so hence we published Why Am I Always Being Researched out into the world. It was as much of a letter to ourselves about how we need to show up when it comes to like funding research and supporting some of these causes, as it was a call for others to really think about how they conduct research. And so we put it out in the world, and long story super short, it's gotten picked up by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's actually, they're using it to guide their K through 12 research guidelines here in the US. Like it's been picked up in a particular project in a part of Africa that is researching child soldiers. Like it's kind of taken on legs of its own. And our hope, to your point, Brian, around Whole Philanthropy, was that this was like almost like a part two of really challenging ourselves, at Chicago Beyond. How do we show up in this work of philanthropy in ways that are conscious, in ways that are connected, and in ways that are really rooted in solidarity, and not in some way of like, giving someone some pittance of something and they expect to be patted on the back. But how do we show up and link arms with organizations, with institutions, with people, with the idea that each of us brings something powerful to the table, and we're better together, and to obliterate that power dynamic that exists in philanthropy. So when you talk about that first one, how should we measure impact, prioritizing like what's important instead of searching for the perfect answer. I think, we need to look no farther sometimes in the research happening in our own backyard as we think about, why is it that we have to, participate in, why are we spending like tens of millions of dollars on research when actually the answers are already out there? Actually, community can tell you what it needs. Actually, like we've done, these studies. And so we don't need to have like the perfect randomized control trial answer to tell us like what to do. And
Amen.
We just don't, and I think that we have to admit that there is this propensity to have, someone in academia validate what community knows to already be true. And we just waste a lot of money, a lot of time. And there's a whole industrial complex behind it that we are supporting that's not healthy.
We find out like, caring adults matter.
Like some of the stuff, I swear to God, I promise you, like I'll be reading this and I'm like, we spent $20 million on this. I know 9 people like in Roseland who could have given you that answer in 20 minutes or less for free. Like we don't need to spend money. And it's like, it's almost like whose voice really matters. We need to spend $20 million to have someone with a particular set of degrees tell us something, when actually, no, the people most impacted can actually give us what the answers are,
Yeah.
That's just my 2 cents.
No, I'm so in your corner. Antwan, do you remember getting studied a lot at OR?
Yeah, that too. And you hit the nail right on the head, Liz. I mean, these are conversations that happen in every barbershop, in every school, in every playground, at every urban establishment about if you really want to know what the problem is, if you really want to get to the root causes of why things are in certain communities here in the city, ask the people.
Yeah.
Ask the people. Actually go into the neighborhoods, talk to them, really figure out what are some of the struggles that these people deal with on a day in and day out basis. But I have one question for you, because you're like I said, your transition from educator, principal to philanthropist. Like how has that transition been for you? And do you feel like some of the skills that you've garnered as a principal at Fenger, how has it helped you become such a fantastic philanthropist in the field that you're doing now?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm fantastic. I think that I'm trying. I think like all of us, like I'm I'm trying to do the best that I can do in the role
Liz,
that
we're giving you your roses. We're giving you your roses, okay?
No one's, I want to be clear, like Chicago Beyond, Liz Dozier, like I've made mistakes along the way. A lot of, when we first started Chicago Beyond, we invested in a lot of research. Like I didn't know any better. And so I, spent, millions of dollars, helping to support, nonprofits get these research studies done, so I think it's important, for people out there, whoever might listen to this. Sometimes people see someone at a certain point and think, oh, it just was this really linear thing and they just got this point of success. But really, there's a lot of trial and a lot of error. And so I always think it's important to just acknowledge that. So I'm sorry, tell me again what your question was, Antwan. I apologize. I lost my train of thought.
No, you're totally fine. How has your experience as a principal at Fenger really helped you in the field of work that you're doing now in philanthropy?
Yeah, Fenger is in the DNA of Chicago Beyond. Like, whether it's decisions that I make or the philosophical principles by which we operate and our values are really all rooted in Fenger, whether it's our value of urgency, of understanding that, we don't have time to just navel gaze. We need to be able to, make decisions, move resources out to people, value people's voice. Like all of those things are really rooted in my experience at Fenger. I actually think, as I think about philanthropy as a whole, what would happen if instead of, people who are, not proximate to community, what if instead people ran foundations or were program officers who actually had experience with the community? How would decisions, be different? How would timelines move? How would we really think about this type of work? So it's in the fabric of everything that we do at Fenger, at Chicago Beyond.
Kind of piggybacking off of Antwan's question, I see your principal life and some of your assumptions there about easy metrics. School systems are sometimes driven by the metrics that are easiest to gather, and also just trying to find the perfect answer instead of doing what's important. I thought that was educators have to deal with messiness every day. You're never perfect as an educator on any given class or any given day. So I saw that. How is that playing out in your philanthropy? And give us an example of a couple projects you're supporting that you think are driving some interesting change.
Yeah, so you raise a really interesting point that we wrote about in Whole Philanthropy, which is just that it's like, the most important insights are not always easily measurable. And it's not just philanthropy, it is just how we're set up as a society. We want to measure things. We want to be able to count things. We want to be able to show because of this, then this. And I get that, right? Particularly in philanthropy, we as an organization, we as philanthropists overall are responsible for stewarding resources. And that's no small task. It's not something that should be taken lightly or willy-nilly. But we also try to realize and begin with this idea of, questions. There's other measures, right? There's stories, there's signals, there's other data available that actually gets us to a more full picture of, if we are actually successful in what we're trying to do, that sometimes numbers they just can't get to, it's easy to count and say this number of young people got this program, or, this number of young people received this particular, service or good or whatever it is. But it becomes harder to really talk about, so what does it actually mean? And it becomes even harder when, you get into programs that have to deal with, or that are therapeutic, or that are, about self-esteem, or that, root children in their own cultural identity and build strength and character within that. It's hard to what does it actually mean in the end? What actually happens as a result of that? And we just thought it was really important to call that out. I think there's a couple of quick examples I'll give you of that. So one, we support a program called Solutions and Resources. It's run by a fantastic gentleman named Donovan Price. If you don't know about Solutions and Resources, you should definitely look it up. But Donovan started this work about, I think it was close to almost like 5 years ago now, where, he was a reverend, a pastor in the community, and just saw a need to be present and to show up when people were shot. And he now is all over the city, and he shows up when people are shot and or killed, and just tries to be present with families and to help them and to begin on their healing journey. He saw a need. And I've seen it too as a principal, and unfortunately have known, way too many young people that have died. And I've been on the scenes when they've died. I've sat with kids in hospitals as they've died. I've also sat in hospitals with kids who have, been shot and recovered. What I'll tell you about that time is like it's a super fragile time. Like there's a traumatic event that has happened, and there's not oftentimes like these. It's not like a service you call and then comes on the scene and then does X. Families are often left to have to figure out what to do next, whether that means burial type of things, or whether it means like healing type of social, like, emotional things, or whether it means like, how do I get my glass fixed from my, front porch window that's just been like blown out? Like, what happens here? There's bullets in my home. What do I do? And Donovan, does that. So he literally goes around the city and helps people do just that. He prays with people, right? I mean, all types of things. And how do you measure that?
Yeah.
What do you say? Do you say he went to, 400 situations like what I was describing last year? That's what he did. I mean, do you say, is that how you measure it? Do you say that, because he sat with a family and prayed with them, that led to what? Do you say that? Like, what do you say? And so the point of why I thought that was so important and wanted to include that in Whole Philanthropy is because I think it's these type of stories and these type of real life, real people things that cannot be measured by a randomized controlled trial. And they can't be measured by some data point, but they actually matter. And I know they matter because, for me, I'm in philanthropy now, but I've sat at that scene with a person who's just lost their child, and they need what Donovan is bringing, and it does bring some type of healing. But I can't measure how much healing it's going to bring. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not like it's not like a counting type of thing. And so we just thought it was important to call out these type of situations and to try to raise awareness for philanthropists to understand that, you're not just going to always invest in the things that have the randomized controlled trial, but you have to invest in the things that that are common sense too. And, Donovan, what he's doing is just common sense. So.
Yeah. And what I see, I'm not going to go into all 6 of these things. I just got to encourage people who watch this to read the Whole Philanthropy. You end on your number 6 point is to measure the messy and complex. And I think your story about Donovan's work is like, that's just messy, hard, complex, needed work, right? And if you want to do things neat and clean in philanthropy, you're going to avoid a lot of the hardest stuff, right?
Yeah. And it's this idea that somehow in philanthropy, like we have to be risk averse. There can't be too much risk. We can't invest in things risky. And, to me, a lot of times that's like code word for, not wanting to invest in communities or invest in Black and brown people. Because when you think about risk, and I think about whether it's, the idea of an Airbnb. I mean, you think about, you go back, 15 years or so, who would ever think we'd be like paying to, sleep in a stranger's house or ride in a stranger's car? I mean, it just wouldn't have been. That was a risky, proposition when you think about when it first got started. I mean, it just, when you think of all the things, how it would have gone wrong, but there was a chance that this could succeed and be a thing. And so I think that when it comes to philanthropy, somehow we don't want to take risks, but that is inherently our job is to take risks. Like people's lives are literally on the line, like, whether they take one path or another. And so it's our job to take risk and really uncover that, riskiness for what it is a lot of times, just being driven by other factors.
Liz, do you think that is, sorry to cut you off, Brian, but I want to spit this question out before I forget. Do you think that is one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to philanthropy work? And if not, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to philanthropy work?
Antwan, do you mean like the idea of riskiness being the biggest thing?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of that and a few other things. This was in the summer of 2020. I had a foundation leader, a U.S. foundation leader, call me, and this person said, Liz, I want to make an investment in Chicago, and I want to invest in Black leaders, but I don't know what to do because there's only this person, this person, this person. And the person I was talking to named 3 people. And so I said to the person, I was like, oh, that's interesting you say that, because I know this person, this person, this person, this person. And actually we have a whole list of other people that you could consider for this. And so I think that, it's a combination of, this over-indexing on risk and what really the undercurrent of that is a lot of times in terms of our own perceptions around Black and brown people. But then it's also this idea there's like a limited number of, Black and brown people that we can actually like invest in, that are good people that actually going to steward the resources well. And this is not true. It's fundamentally not true. And so I think our role at Chicago Beyond, what we've been trying to do through some of our rapid response work, through our healing fund, through the investments that we've been making, is to showcase that. We're actually going to announce in the next couple of weeks a concept we've been working on called Abundance. And we're announcing it with the MacArthur Foundation as well as the Grand Victoria Foundation. And it really seeks to turn that idea upside down, the idea that there's only a few Black organizations you can really invest in, but that there are an abundant number of them, and we need to do a better job of seeking them out and not just making these like small $1,000, $5,000 contributions, but really make large-scale contributions to our work, similar to when we think about Airbnb and Lyft and Uber and all those folks, how people bet on those ideas to really be successful.
It's so funny to me that the venture capitalists will throw millions at a kid who can code a little bit, and they're fine with 9 out of 10 failing, right? But in philanthropy, we're like, every dollar's got to be perfect, right?
Yeah. It's not logical, It's not going to be a one-to-one correlation. I always tell my team that. I've told my team many times, like, if we're not failing, that's an actual problem. Like there are some things that we should be doing that actually don't work themselves out. And if everything works itself out, we have to really take a look at our process, what is what are we missing here? Because everything can't work out. It means we're being too tight. We're not like letting like real ideas through. So
I know Antwan has some rapid fire questions. I have one question that hit me I love the partnership. I love everything you're doing on your
thanks,
strategy
Brian.
here. So I'm
a
fan. I think the one hard thing I'd say is someone who sits on a lot of privilege, gender, race, et cetera. Class is a big issue. And you have the money. So on some level, there is a class question as someone who always sat across the table from philanthropy. And it was sometimes I could form an effective partnership, but that class issue was always so present in some sense. We were chasing the money, trying to survive, and you had the money. And sometimes we could get past it, but it always felt like it was a question in the air. And how do you deal with that sort of classism within the philanthropy nonprofit world?
Yeah, we've actually called it out. We called it out in Why Am I Always Being Researched? We kind of touch on it, and definitely in Whole Philanthropy, and in the document and guidebook we're getting ready to release titled Abundance, we come face to face with it and call it out for what it is, and really try to call in a new way of working together between nonprofits and philanthropists, with the idea that, we should each be on equal footing. And we can't exist as if somehow, if you have a degree or if you're a researcher, you then sit up here, then everybody else sits at the bottom, and these, folks up here at the top tell these people what to do because they're somehow more valid, smarter, whatever the thing might be. But really that we should all be working, we should essentially be working together hand in hand, and even though Chicago Beyond has had that philosophy since its inception, it's hard. Like there's a particular organization that we funded, and, I had worked with this organization for years as a principal, and really wanted to support their work when I started Chicago Beyond because I knew what it did for kids. And I can remember talking to the folks at the program, in particular one of their leaders, and was telling them, this, 7-figure, $1 million plus investment was coming. And, I remember the person saying to me, well, what do you want me to do? Or what do you want me to do with it? And I was like, no, what do you want to do with it? And he was like, no, but what do you want me to do? And I'm like, no, what do you want to do? And it was like 2 months of this, like back and forth. The gist of the question was, for him, was like, what do you want me to do? And I was like, no, what do you want to do? And we said that 12 different iterations of that. But it was really hard for him, to comprehend how could we be getting resources without someone telling us what to do with it, Yeah. And the idea in my mind was like, I trust you. Let's sit down at the table and we can figure it out together. But you as the practitioner are the guide, like just because we're writing a large check doesn't mean that we understand what's best to do with the kids that you serve, that you see every single day. And so I think it takes that, to answer your question, I really think it takes a recognition of the power dynamics that exist. And as a philanthropist, it really takes, the patience to show up in a way that is, rooted in community centeredness and rooted in solidarity,
That makes a lot of sense. We're going a little over time. Can we hit you with a couple quick hits?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So first and foremost, thank you so much for being our very first guest. This has been absolutely awesome. Once again, we want to make sure we give individuals like yourself and everybody moving forward their roses for doing such amazing work here in the Chicagoland area. It is so important and so crucial that we spotlight individuals such as yourself, Liz. Continue to do the work that you've been doing. Like I said, you have been a absolute sunshine in the field of all the craziness that's been going on at Fenger throughout these past years. Thank you so much. Before we get out of here, we want to end on something lighthearted.
Yes, let's do it.
Very in-depth conversation. So I'm going to throw a couple questions out at you, and you just go ahead and shoot as you go. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Cubs or White Sox?
White Sox all day, every day.
Uncle Remy's or Harold's?
Dang! Harold's.
Harold, okay. Chicago-style pizza or Chicago-style hot dog?
Oh. Dang. I'll go hot dogs, even though I don't really mess with hot dogs, but I really like New York-style pizza. Don't tell anybody, but
Liz, you break my heart. I got to put it to merit on you. And then last thing, what is the most underrated place to visit in Chicago? The most underrated places that people usually don't think about when they come to visit Chicago.
Oh my God. Okay. So I don't know what you'd call it, but it's like, how when you're coming down Lakeshore Drive, so you're coming from south and you're going into downtown and you're driving down Lakeshore Drive and you can see you're driving north. So you're like right around, like I'd say 35th, 55th, like right in that pocket. And you can see the city in the background. Like I just think in the foreground, I just think that is just the most iconic, beautiful, like people just don't, what I'm saying? Like, unless like it's just a beautiful, it just showcases all the beauty of our city. You know what I'm saying? From the South Side. So
are we talking daytime or nighttime?
I think it looks great daytime and nighttime, but if I had to pick a time to see it, I feel like it's definitely in the daytime.
Brian, any last last comments?
No, it's so fun to spend time with you, Liz, and just
Thank you.
Keep pushing your envelopes. I love what cheerleading from the side.
Oh,
and
thank
anything
you, Brian.
we can do to help. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Antwan. It was so fun to be in conversation with you guys today.
Yes. How can people get informed with Chicago Beyond?
Yes, they can go to chicagobeyond.org and they can, from there go on to all our social sites, our Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all our things, as well as just learn more about Chicago Beyond at our website, chicagobeyond.org.
All right.
Fabulous.
Brian, not bad for first show, yeah.
Yay. Have a beautiful day, Liz.
You did your thing. It was good.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for your time. Continue to do the amazing work. And once again, we're giving you your roses. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks. Right back at you guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.